It was a quiet Sunday morning in Los Angeles, August 5th, 1962. The air was still, eerily calm, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Inside a modest Spanish-style home on Fifth Helena Drive, time had already stopped for one of the most famous women in the world. Marilyn Monroe, Hollywood's golden goddess, lay motionless on her bed. The phone had already rung. The whispers had already begun. The tragedy of the century had taken its final bow. But how did we get here? How did Norma Jean Mortensen, the unwanted child of a troubled woman, become Marilyn Monroe, a name that would outlive everyone who ever touched her life? To understand Marilyn, we must go back to the very beginning. Chapter 1, Norma Jean, the girl behind the smile. Norma Jean wasn't born into fame. She wasn't born into fortune. She was born into chaos. On June 1st, 1926, in Los Angeles General Hospital, a baby girl opened her eyes to a world that never quite had room for her. Her mother, Gladys Pearl Baker, was a film cutter at RKO Pictures, a woman with her own dreams, once bright but now broken. Her father unknown. Gladys would list a man named Edward Mortensen on the birth certificate, but he had long vanished. Some say Marilyn's real father was a co-worker of Gladys's, a man who denied his paternity until the end. From the very beginning, Norma Jean was a child of secrets and shadows. Gladys struggled with mental illness, paranoia, hallucinations, and violent mood swings that would later be diagnosed as schizophrenia. She tried to care for Norma, but the burden was too heavy. By the time Norma was 7, her mother had been institutionalized, and the little girl had become a ward of the state. She was passed from foster home to foster home. Always the outsider, always the new girl. She was sexually abused by people who were supposed to protect her. She found safety not in people, but in books and movies, especially the silver screen, where women were adored and untouchable. Norma Jean would often sit in dark theaters for hours, watching Jean Harlow and Carole Lombard flicker in black and white glory. She didn't dream of fame yet, she dreamed of escape. Chapter 2, The Factory Girl's Dream. By the time Norma Jean was 16, she had already learned that life doesn't wait for innocence to catch up. When her foster family decided to relocate out of state, California law prohibited them from taking her. The alternative was the orphanage again. So she married. James Dougherty was a neighbor, 5 years her senior. It wasn't love. It was survival. On June 19, 1942, Norma Jean
became Mrs. Dougherty. She dropped out of high school and took up
the role of housewife while her husband joined the Merchant Marines during World War II. In his absence, Norma Jean found work in a munitions factory, assembling parachutes and spraying airplane parts with fire retardant. She was just another war worker, lost in the sea of women supporting the home front. But then something happened. A photographer named David Conover visited the factory to take morale-boosting pictures of pretty girls doing their part for the war effort. He found her. Norma's face, her smile, her presence, it leapt through the lens. Conover couldn't look away. She had something, he later said. Something different. Something electric. That single photo shoot turned into more modeling gigs. And those gigs became covers. 35 magazine covers in less than 2 years. Suddenly, the girl who once lived in orphanages was being called the blue-eyed sweetheart and Miss Artichoke Queen. And the factory? It was gone. So was James Dougherty. She divorced him in 1946, choosing her growing career over domestic life. I wasn't the kind of girl who could stay at home, she would later say. Norma Jean wanted more than modeling. She wanted the screen, the place where the greats lived forever. But she knew Hollywood didn't want Norma Jean Mortensen. They wanted someone else. Someone perfect, someone unforgettable. That's when the transformation began. She dyed her hair platinum blonde. She practiced her walk, hips swaying gently, a rhythm designed to hypnotize. She changed her smile, studied acting, reshaped her voice into that breathy, intoxicating whisper. And then she changed her name. Marilyn after Marilyn Miller, the Broadway legend. Monroe, her mother's maiden name. Marilyn Monroe, a name that shimmered like champagne. But behind the sparkle, she was still that girl, desperate to be wanted, terrified to be abandoned. Her early film roles were small, a secretary here, a waitress there, but she had screen presence. Directors noticed. So did studio heads. And so did men, powerful men who offered opportunity in exchange for obedience. Marilyn knew what she had to do to survive. She learned the game, played it well, but it never felt like she was in control. By 1950, she landed a notable role in The Asphalt Jungle, film noir that showed she was more than a pretty face. Then came All About Eve, 1950, Clash by Night, 1952, and finally, boom, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, 1953. How to Marry a Millionaire, 1953. The 7-Year Itch, 1955. Suddenly, she wasn't just a star, she was the star. America's fantasy, Hollywood's golden girl. Men adored her. Women envied her. The world watched, mesmerized, but no one really saw her. Chapter 4, The Blonde Bombshell Era. By 1953, Marilyn Monroe was more than just a name. She was a phenomenon. Men fantasized about her. Women emulated her. Studios cashed in on her image, always wrapping her in silk and shadows. She was marketed not as a person but as a product, the ultimate blonde bombshell. In Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, she delivered one of her most iconic performances as Lorelei, Lee, the gold-digging showgirl, with a heart full of diamonds, dressed in a shocking pink gown, singing "Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend." She didn't just perform, she immortalized herself. But Marilyn didn't want to be a joke. She didn't want to be a cartoon character of desire. She wanted to act, to be respected, to matter beyond her measurements. And Hollywood didn't care. Despite her growing fame, the studios still paid her less than her co-stars. They refused to give her script approval. She was told what to wear, what to say, how to smile. So she began to rebel. In 1954, she married Joe DiMaggio, one of the most famous athletes in the world, a retired baseball legend. Their union was a tabloid dream. The Yankee Clipper marries America's sweetheart. But behind closed doors, the marriage was turbulent. DiMaggio wanted a housewife. Marilyn wanted the world. Things came to a head while filming The 7-Year Itch, the now infamous scene of Marilyn, standing over a subway grate as her white dress billowed upward, drew a crowd of thousands and enraged her husband. He hated the attention, hated that other men stared at her, hated that he couldn't control her. They divorced 9 months later. Chapter 5, Love, Fame, and Fragility. Though broken by her failed marriage, Marilyn pressed forward. She returned to work, to photo shoots, to premieres, but the emptiness lingered. In 1955, she made her boldest move yet. She left Hollywood. She fled to New York City and enrolled in the Actors Studio, under the legendary Lee Strasberg. Among serious actors and intellectuals, she found a new identity, a student, a thinker, someone craving to be taken seriously. She read Chekhov, Dostoevsky, and Freud. She studied method acting and wrote poetry. This wasn't the Marilyn the world knew. This was Norma Jean yearning to be whole. And then came her third marriage to playwright Arthur Miller. He was the opposite of DiMaggio, cerebral, calm, grounded. Marilyn saw in him a kind of salvation. He saw in her an innocent muse. They married in 1956 for a brief moment. It seemed like happiness had finally found her. She starred in Bus, stopped that same year, a performance critics praised as her most mature yet. Her next film, The Prince and the Showgirl, 1957, was a personal production under her own company, Marilyn Monroe Productions. For once, she was calling the shots. But even joy for Marilyn came with shadows. She suffered multiple miscarriages. Her mental health began to decline. The pressure to be Marilyn in public and Norma Jean in private became unbearable. Pills became her crutch, sleeping pills, antidepressants, anything to dull the ache. The marriage with Miller began to unravel. He wrote about her in his journals as insecure and childish. She discovered one of his notebooks describing her as an embarrassment. Heartbroken, humiliated, and spiraling, Marilyn divorced him in 1961. Chapter 6, The Struggles Beneath the Spotlight. By the early 1960s, Marilyn Monroe had everything and nothing. Her name could sell out theaters. Her face adorned billboards in every corner of America. But when the lights dimmed, what remained was a woman slipping further into the abyss of her own mind. She was increasingly dependent on barbiturates and sleeping pills, often mixing them with alcohol. Her chronic insomnia, anxiety, and fear of abandonment were compounded by a lifetime of trauma, and now betrayal. Her marriage to Arthur Miller, once the beacon of her intellectual rebirth, had ended in emotional devastation. She moved from one psychiatrist to another, often treated more like a subject than a patient. At one point, She was involuntarily committed to a psychiatric ward in 1961, locked behind barred windows. Screaming that she wasn't insane, Marilyn called Joe DiMaggio, the only person who came. He walked in, demanded her release, and took her home. Despite their past, Joe never stopped caring for her. In fact, he would remain quietly devoted to her until the very end. The Kennedy connection. This was also the period when Marilyn's name became intertwined with political royalty, the Kennedys. Whispers, rumors, half-truths, her alleged affairs with both President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, have become legend. Historians still debate the details. But what is known is that Marilyn was once again used, passed around, and discarded. On May 19, 1962, she performed what would become her most iconic public moment, a sultry, whispered rendition of Happy Birthday, Mr. President, at Madison Square Garden, in front of 15,000 people. Her dress was so tight she had to be sewn into it, nude-colored, encrusted with over 2,500 rhinestones. The world watched, captivated. John F. Kennedy smiled. Marilyn swayed. But soon after, she was cut off from the president, from his circle, from everyone. She had become a liability. Dissent. The betrayal stung deeper than the rest. Once again, she had given her heart, her trust, her vulnerability, and it had been tossed aside like an old costume. Back in Los Angeles, she tried to pick up the pieces. In 1962, she signed on for Something's Got to Give, a comeback film. But filming was a disaster. She was frequently late or absent, often due to illness or sedation. The studio grew frustrated. Co-star Dean Martin defended her, but Fox had had enough. They fired her publicly. For Marilyn, it was humiliation all over again. The headlines were brutal. The cameras were relentless. But behind the scenes, she was planning a return. She had just negotiated to be rehired by Box photographers, took glowing new portraits. Friends said she was hopeful again, maybe even happy. No one knew the end was near. Chapter 7. The Fall and the Final Days. It was August 4th, 1962. The sun had set over Los Angeles. In her Spanish-style home on Fifth Helena Drive in Brentwood, Marilyn Monroe was alone, save for her housekeeper and a few calls from friends. She spoke to her psychiatrist. She talked to Peter Lawford, the brother-in-law of the Kennedys. She was vague, tired, disconnected. At some point that evening, the phone went silent. By the early hours of August 5th, her housekeeper noticed something was wrong. Marilyn's bedroom door was locked. No answer. The light still on. A doctor was called. Then police. When they broke in, they found her lying face down in bed. The telephone receiver clutched in her hand. Empty pill bottles were scattered across the nightstand. She was gone. Just 36 years old. The world reacts. The news shook the world like an earthquake through a glass city. The image of Marilyn Monroe, forever young, forever beautiful, suddenly frozen in time. Fans cried. Theaters dimmed their lights. Radio stations played her favorite songs. Newspapers around the world ran the same headline in different languages. Marilyn Monroe dead at 36. Joe DiMaggio handled the funeral arrangements. He banned all members of the Hollywood elite and the Kennedy family. No cameras, no press, just roses, silence, and sorrow. For the next 20 years, he had red roses delivered to her crypt 3 times a week. Conspiracies and questions. Even in death, Marilyn wasn't allowed peace. Rumors erupted almost immediately about foul play, cover-ups, even murder. Was it the Kennedys? The FBI, the mafia? The studio executives who had everything to gain from keeping her secrets buried? Her autopsy ruled it a probable suicide due to an overdose of barbiturates. But the inconsistencies in the timeline, the mishandling of evidence, and the missing phone records only fueled the fire of suspicion. The truth? We may never know. But what's undeniable is this. Marilyn Monroe died the way she lived, in the spotlight yet utterly alone. Legacy beyond the grave. And still, she lives. In paintings, posters, pop culture, in songs, in fashion, in every woman trying to own her body and voice, in every actress fighting to be more than just a pretty face. Marilyn Monroe became more than an icon, she became a myth. And like all great myths, her story is a mirror held up to a world that loved her beauty, but ignored her pain. A world that adored her smile, but dismissed her mind. A world that made her famous, but never made her free. Chapter 8, More Than a Star. Marilyn Monroe once said, "I'm not interested in money. I just want to be wonderful." And wonderful she was, in the truest, most tragic sense of the word. She embodied everything America worshipped: beauty, charm, sexuality, fame. But she also carried everything it rejected: trauma, mental illness, vulnerability, and the deep desire to be understood. She was a woman who had no father, a mother lost to madness, and a childhood full of shadows. Yet she rose. She redefined what it meant to be a star. She made the world look at her, not just as an object, but as a presence. Behind every red lipstick smile was a girl who cried herself to sleep. Behind every perfect photo shoot was a woman asking, "Will they ever love me for who I am?" And that question still echoes decades later. The symbol and the soul. Today, Marilyn Monroe is a symbol of beauty, yes, of glamour, absolutely, but also of how fame can consume the very people it celebrates. She paved the way for generations of artists, actors, and dreamers, especially women, who demand to be seen as more than a body, more than a smile. She was silenced too soon, but in that silence, she spoke louder than ever. A final thought for the audience. As you finish this story, ask yourself, how many Marilyns are there today? How many women smile for the world while screaming inside? How many are told to be quiet, to look pretty, to be perfect, and punished when they try to be real? Marilyn Monroe was not perfect. She was messy, radiant, broken, brilliant. She was not just a sex symbol. She was a human being. And for all the cameras that followed her, no one ever truly saw her. Maybe now, you just did. If this story moved you, if you felt a piece of Marilyn's soul echo in your own, don't let it end here. Like this video, share it. Leave a comment below with your thoughts about her legacy, your favorite moment, or simply, "I see you, Marilyn." And if you're struggling, if you're chasing a dream while carrying pain no one else sees, you're not alone. Just like Marilyn, your story matters. Subscribe for more powerful stories of icons who changed the world and paid the price. Until next time, keep chasing the light, but never forget what it cost to shine.